let us take a little journey through Dr. Jeffrey Holland's famous musket fire talk at BYU. Perhaps through this exercise we'll be able to get some insight about who is and is not taking that talk out of context. As a content warning, the pink parts in my text summary are the parts where I'm going to roll the tape and let him talk directly. Other times I might quote him. The pink parts tend to be the moments listening to his talk where I thought, is he really saying that? So Dr. Holland starts his address by talking about how coming to the BYU campus gives him a deep sense of nostalgia and some other emotion that doesn't really get specified. He gives prolific praise for the other service participants, and then he praises BYU President Kevin Worthen for, quote, being presidential and, quote, every day trying to make this university what it's supposed to be. So Gerardo Sumano and John DeLynn over at Mormon Stories and Kyle Ashworth over at Latter Gay Stories kind of interpreted the talk overall as a polite smackdown on the president and the administration of BYU in a public forum that could have kind of a different effect than going after them in private. I'm not sure if that's what was going on here, but I do want to note that being presidential and trying to make this university what it's supposed to be, to me, sounds like the kind of thing that you would say when you, like, for politeness reasons, need to praise somebody, but you don't really want to praise them. You have a different agenda. But maybe I'm reading too much into that. I don't know. Moving on. Then he says this thing that kind of sets the tone for the talk.
I'm going to speak of the future. This future of BYU, but one anchored in our distinctive past. Now, if I've worded that just right, it means I can talk about anything I want. I am grateful that the full university family is gathered today, faculty and staff and administration. Regardless of your job description, I'm going to speak to all of you as teachers, because at BYU, that's what all of us are.
After that, he tells a story about being in the car with his mom when he was 7 years old, seeing the big white Y on the side of the mountain, and asking, hey, what is that? And his mom explains that it's BYU symbol, and he receives personal revelation that BYU is going to be significant in his life. He goes on to express that BYU's documented successes, such as academic rankings, sports wins, the reach of BYU TV, etc., are, quote, outward signs of an inward grace, and I think that's a really nice compliment. He expresses that BYU's real treasure is the personal experiences people have there. He gives examples of that involve professors being inspired, having experiences that inspire them and allow them to develop their personal ideologies. He then tells the story of a very academically distinguished faculty candidate who chose BYU over other, top-ranking universities because he wanted to help students to hear the distant chorus of when, quote, the citizens of Zion shall come forth with songs of everlasting joy. And from there, he says that, we want to provide students with that kind of experience like we just described, and therefore it's very painful to get this kind of letter that he's about to read.
You should know, the writer says, that some people in the extended community are feeling abandoned and betrayed at BYU, or by BYU. It seems that some professors, at least the vocal ones in the media, are supporting ideas that many of us feel are contradictory to gospel principles, making it appear to be about like any other university our sons and daughters could have attended.
And then he gets to the real clincher, the thing that may have motivated him to share this letter, even though it's rather unprofessional. Anyway, I'll let you see the clip.
Several parents have said they no longer want to send their children here or donate to the school.
So, like any good university administrator, he's worried about anything that might lower enrollment or donations. A girl talked about losing her faith as a result of stuff that she learned at BYU, which, hey, it happens. My experience in high school seminary class really lit the fire underneath my faith crisis and faith transition, because it was every day bringing me face to face with the things that were giving me cognitive dissonance and the things that felt wrong. But anyway, that's, what's brought up as a consequence of the faculty not being aligned. And then he says that many letters like this are forwarded to Kevin Worthen, which Again, not surprising. If you're in charge of a university, you're absolutely going to get angry letters from somebody. It's part of the job, in my opinion. He then goes on to quote himself 41 years prior, saying
that if we're an extension of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and take a significant amount of sacred tithes and other human precious resources, all of which might well be expended in other worthy causes, surely our integrity demands that our lives be absolutely consistent with and characteristic of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. At a university, there will always be a healthy debate regarding a whole syllabus full of issues. But until we all come to the unity of the faith and have grown to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, our next best achievement will be to stay in harmony with the Lord's anointed, those whom he has designated to declare church doctrine and to guide Brigham Young University as its trustees.
So basically that was an overly verbose, roundabout way of saying that whatever comes from the top church leaders is not material that's up for debate at BYU. You can debate about other stuff, like, I don't know, the central dogma of molecular biology, but you can't debate about anything that's church doctrine, apparently. He then brings the hammer down even further by quoting Russell M. Nelson from 2014, saying that because the church is growing in less prosperous nations, there's a need to conserve tithing revenue, and BYU is great, but it's not essential for eternal life, and he further points out how now Russell M. Nelson is president of the church, and he holds BYU's purse strings, he has authority over every single little purchase made. Now we're coming to the metaphorical musket fire part of the talk. So, content warning, he quotes Dallin H. Oakes from 2017, and Dallin H. Oakes in turn was quoting Neil A. Maxwell, so it's three men in a row thinking it's a good idea to say what he says here.
And I quote, "In a way, Latter-day Saint scholars at BYU and elsewhere are a little bit like the builders of the temple in Nauvoo, who worked with a trowel in one hand and a musket in the other. Today, scholars building the temple of learning must also pause on occasion to defend the kingdom. Then Elder Oakes said challengingly, "I'd like to hear a little more musket fire from the temple of learning." He said this in a way that could have applied to a host of topics in various departments, but the one he specifically mentioned was the doctrine of the family and defending marriage as the union of a man and a woman.
Metaphorical musket fire to defend the backwards, oppressive, harmful, regressive idea that supposedly marriage is only for straight people. Lovely. He then claims that there has been some friendly fire or firing of muskets in the wrong direction. This is almost certainly a reference to queer student activism at BYU because this friendly fire thing comes up again later in the talk. Then he says that on this whole same-sex topic, that's how he put it, that he and his brethren have spent more time and shed more tears on the subject than they could ever adequately convey. Now, I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the talk, he made a really weird comment about how he really easily cries at events like the opening of a used car dealership. I think that Matt Easton and Kyle Ashworth put it really well when it comes to explaining why this was not the comforting, nice sentiment that, you know, one might hope that it was.
To that I say, I don't know. I don't feel that love. I don't feel, if you have tears, look at my scars. You know, your pain is nothing compared to that of my community. And how dare you say in the same speech that you don't want us showing too much support, you don't want us speaking our truth in ways that are not against the gospel of Jesus Christ or the doctrines of the church, but then also say that you love us and that the world can be so cruel. Like, I'm sorry, my experience is that the world has embraced and has loved me. They're not the ones that have been cruel.
I sat up in bed the other night and I'm like, oh my gosh, the beginning of his speech started with, I cry at the opening of grocery stores. I cry at the ribbon cutting of used car dealerships, used car lots. And then he says, I've cried for the LGBTQ community. And I thought, for just that moment, it was so disingenuous to me because I love Elder Holland. There were so many moments there that I thought, that's so disingenuous to cry, to boast about crying at a used car lot, the grand opening of a used car lot, and then to compare those same tears to the ones that will never bring back some of my friends who completed suicide, to me was so disingenuous, and it was not the message that I would have expected from a special witness of Christ. Something inside of me broke when I made that realization.
From there, he says, quote, "So it's with a little scar tissue of our own that we are trying to avoid and hope all will try to avoid language and symbols and situations that are more divisive than unifying at a time we want to show love to all of God's children." From there, he jumps right into the comments that I played before, where he's doing a smackdown on an individual student, Matt Easton, for coming out in his valedictorian speech. And as I covered in my last video, really mischaracterizing that talk as well. He then claims that the brethren weep and pray with those who, quote, live with this same-sex challenge, his words, but while keeping, quote, obedience to commandments evident in every individual life. He says that balance in this situation consists of ensuring, quote, that love and empathy do not get interpreted as condoning and advocacy, or that orthodox and loyalty to principle not be interpreted as unkindness or disloyalty. This part made me angry. First of all, because how can he empathize with what he's asking of gay people? The church asks gay people to have no romantic love of any kind in their lives for their entire lives, depriving themselves of something that for most humans is essential to health. And how can he sympathize? How can he empathize with that as a straight man who got to marry whoever he wanted? Second, even bigger reason is that, good advocacy, good activism, by definition, is born of love. Love for humanity makes me go to anti-war protests, anti-colonial protests. Love for the community at Smith College made me advocate that disabled students be treated better. Love for the MIT community led me to build up the unionization movement, which was also born of our love for our research and wanting to be able to do that research well. You know, it was love for my fellow Americans and my fellow Americans who are Black that led me to write Black Lives Matter on poster boards and go to protests. Advocacy is born of love, and sometimes that love is righteous anger, because anger is a recognition that somebody you love is being harmed, that something unjust is happening. So even if somebody is expressing anger, sometimes that too is coming from love. What have we learned from the talk thus far? BYU is very important to Dr. Holland, both in terms of the way that he conceptualized it in that story where he was 7 years old and driving in the mountains with his mom, and in terms of the spiritual experiences people have at BYU. He has a lot of sympathy with community members and possible donors who want to see BYU maintain its conservative image. Scholarly dissent is allowed at BYU only on topics for which the LDS top leaders have not taken a firm stance of some kind. Queer advocacy is discouraged, even when it's taking the form like Matt Easton's valedictorian speech that's very faith-affirming and not breaking any of the rules. It's still too divisive, but somehow this talk does not count as too divisive. The church's opposition to gay marriage is still a salient topic, despite the federal rulings. And finally, Dr. Holland may not understand the definition of advocacy. In my next video, I'll examine the last part of Dr. Holland's talk, with special emphasis on the new sheriff in town moment where he introduces Clark Gilbert, and talk about how the ensuing drama has unfolded over the 4 years since that address. If you've enjoyed this content, please hit the like and subscribe buttons on YouTube and follow me on TikTok.